a decorated officer, a love that defied logic, and a single gunshot that shattered it all. What drives a person sworn to protect the law to cross its most sacred line? Stay with us as we unravel the story of Jova Jackson, a rising star in the Rockdale County Sheriff's Office whose devotion to duty and ambition made her a symbol of integrity. But behind the polished uniform lay a secret life entwined with love, betrayal, and unimaginable loss. This is not a simple tale of crime and punishment. It's a story of choices that led to tragedy, with consequences no one could have predicted. By the end of this story, we'll answer the haunting question: how does a woman dedicated to protecting others end up facing charges of murder? Let's dive in. Jonesboro, Georgia. A community nestled in the serene embrace of palm trees and warm breezes. It's a town where neighbors greet each other by name, and trust in the local sheriff's department is as solid as the roots of the towering oaks lining the streets. But on a quiet June morning in 2023, the calm was shattered. A single gunshot echoed through the neighborhood, and within moments, everything changed. At the center of it all was Jova Jackson, a 31-year-old deputy known for her unwavering dedication to justice. She had risen through the ranks, earning respect as both a mentor and a protector. Her uniform, once a symbol of trust and authority, now carried the weight of suspicion. For at her feet lay Terrell Douglas, a man whose charm once captivated her, now lifeless on the cold ground. How did it come to this? How does a woman who built her life around the law end up accused of taking the ultimate step against it? To understand, we need to trace Jova's journey. A story filled with ambition, love, and choices that defied logic. Because when emotions mix with duty, the line between right and wrong becomes dangerously thin. In the quiet, sun-soaked town of Jonesboro, Georgia, mornings usually start with the sound of birds singing and the rustle of palm trees in the breeze. It's the kind of place where families leave their doors unlocked and neighbors wave as they pass by. But on the morning of June 4, 2023, tranquility gave way to chaos. A single gunshot pierced the stillness, echoing through the streets. Within moments, the serene community was thrust into the center of a chilling mystery. At the heart of this unfolding tragedy was Jova Jackson, a 31-year-old deputy with a sterling reputation. Jova wasn't just another officer in the Rockdale County Sheriff's Office. She was a rising star. Her peers described her as diligent, compassionate, and deeply committed to the community she served. She wore her badge with pride, earning respect from those she worked with and trust from those she protected. Yet behind the polished uniform was a woman whose personal life had taken a dramatic and dangerous turn. Jova's life changed when she met Terrell Douglas, a man with a magnetic charm and a complicated past. Terrell was no stranger to trouble, a convicted felon with a history that many would consider a red flag. But for Jova, he represented something different. Maybe it was his charisma. Or perhaps it was the idea of saving someone who seemed lost. Whatever the reason, their connection was undeniable and ultimately disastrous. Their relationship, however, was far from simple. Terrell's troubled history often clashed with Jova's role as a law enforcement officer. As whispers of their involvement spread, Jova faced growing scrutiny at work. Her peers questioned how someone so dedicated to upholding the law could fall for a man whose life seemed defined by breaking it. But Jova was undeterred. To her, Terrell was more than his past. Then there was the unborn child, a life growing quietly amidst the chaos. Jova's pregnancy added a layer of complexity that no one could ignore. For Jova, it was a glimmer of hope, a chance at a new beginning. But for those watching from the outside, it raised even more questions. Could Terrell, with his checkered past and unpredictable behavior, be the partner and father Jova so desperately wanted him to be? What began as a story of love and hope soon spiraled into one of betrayal and heartbreak. By the time the morning of June 4th arrived, the bond that once brought Jova and Terrell together had unraveled completely. And as investigators pieced together the events leading up to that fateful morning, the question remained. Was this an act of self-defense, or had Jova crossed a line from which there was no return? To understand the events of that day, we need to dig deeper into their lives, their choices, and the forces that brought them to the breaking point. Because sometimes, the lines between love and obsession, trust and betrayal, can blur until they disappear altogether. Jova Jackson was just 22 years old when she joined the Rockdale County Sheriff's Office, for someone so young. She carried herself with remarkable poise and determination. Her supervisors quickly noticed her sharp instincts and natural ability to connect with people. From her very first assignment, it was clear that Jova wasn't just doing a job. She was fulfilling a calling. Her early days were spent working the night shift as a detention officer at the county jail. It was a tough environment, full of challenges that would test even the most seasoned professionals. But Jova excelled. She had a way of handling tense situations with a calm demeanor, diffusing conflicts before they escalated. Her colleagues admired her patience and level-headedness, while her superiors saw potential for something greater. By the time she turned 25, Jova had already earned her first promotion. She was assigned to patrol duty, where her work in the community made her a recognizable face in Jonesboro. Residents knew her as a deputy who genuinely cared. Whether it was helping a struggling family or mentoring at-risk youth, Jova had a way of making people feel seen and heard. Her reputation grew, and with it, so did the trust of those she served. Over the next few years, Jova climbed the ranks. Her diligence, combined with her charisma, made her a favorite among her peers. By the time she reached her early 30s, she was promoted to the position of corporal, a role that came with added responsibilities and respect. She seemed unstoppable, a beacon of what law enforcement could and should be. But as her career soared, her personal life began to take a darker turn. The first time Jova met Terrell Douglas, it was at a community outreach event, a program designed to help former offenders reintegrate into society. Terrell had recently been released from prison, carrying with him the weight of a troubled past. His charm was undeniable, and he had a way of making people believe he was ready for a fresh start. For Jova, Terrell was intriguing. Beneath his rough exterior, she saw a man who wanted to change, someone who needed a second chance. Their conversation started innocently enough, but over time, a connection grew. Terrell wasn't just another face in the crowd. He became someone Jova couldn't stop thinking about. For reasons she couldn't fully explain, she felt drawn to him. Despite the glaring differences in their lives, her position as a rising star in law enforcement and his status as an ex-convict, their relationship deepened. They began meeting in secret, away from the prying eyes of her colleagues. For Jova, it was thrilling and terrifying all at once. She knew the risks. Terrell's criminal record wasn't just a red flag, it was a direct threat to her career. But emotions don't follow logic, and Jova found herself unable to walk away. For a while, Jova managed to keep her relationship with Terrell under wraps. But in a town as small as Jonesboro, secrets have a way of surfacing. It wasn't long before whispers started circulating. Deputies saw her with Terrell in public, and soon, her colleagues began to question her judgment. How could someone so dedicated to upholding the law fall for a man who had spent years on the wrong side of it? The scrutiny wasn't just informal. Jova's superiors took notice. In 2021, she received her first official reprimand, a stern warning to distance herself from Terrell or face disciplinary action. The tension in her professional life was palpable. Some of her closest colleagues stopped speaking to her, while others expressed their concerns openly. Jova was caught in a web of conflicting emotions. On one side was the career she had worked so hard to build, and on the other was the man she couldn't seem to let go of. As the whispers turned into formal investigations, Jova's relationship with Terrell became a public secret. Her department began monitoring her actions closely, questioning her ability to separate her personal life from her professional duties. The once bright star of the Rockdale County Sheriff's Office now found herself under a shadow of suspicion. But instead of pulling away from Terrell, Jova dug in deeper. For her, the bond they shared felt unbreakable, even as it threatened to unravel everything else in her life. By 2023, the pressure had reached a boiling point. Jova was given an ultimatum: end the relationship or risk suspension. It was a choice no one expected her to make, but Jova chose Terrell. Her decision shocked her colleagues and sent ripples through the department. For Jova, it was an act of defiance, a way to prove that her personal life was her own. But it was also a decision that would cost her dearly. The tension between Jova and her department grew unbearable. She was isolated, not just professionally but personally. The man she had sacrificed everything for was becoming increasingly distant, leaving Jova to face the fallout alone. And as the months went by, it became clear that her relationship with Terrell wasn't just a threat to her career. It was a threat to her very identity. By early 2023, cracks in Jova Jackson's carefully concealed personal life began to show. Her once passionate relationship with Terrell Douglas, the man she had risked everything for, was no longer the safe haven she believed it to be. Terrell, known for his charisma and charm, began to distance himself. Days would pass without a word. He became evasive, offering vague excuses for his absences, leaving Jova to wonder where he was and who he might be with. Rumors began to circulate, whispers that Terrell was spending time with other women. These weren't the idle gossip of strangers. They came from people Jova knew and trusted. Friends told her they had seen Terrell at bars flirting with women and even leaving with them late into the night. Jova, already under intense scrutiny at work, now found herself battling doubts in her personal life. The man she had sacrificed her career for was slipping away, and she was powerless to stop it. Heartbroken, Jova tried to confront Terrell about the rumors, but his responses were dismissive at best and outright defensive at worst. He accused her of being paranoid, of not trusting him, even as his actions gave her every reason to question his loyalty. For Jova, this was more than just a relationship. It was the foundation she had built her future on. She was carrying his child, and every unanswered call, every unexplained absence felt like a betrayal not just to her, but to the life she had envisioned for their family. At the same time, Jova's professional life was unraveling. Her colleagues at the Rockdale County Sheriff's Office had grown suspicious of her connection to Terrell. They noticed her distracted demeanor, the whispered phone calls, and the tension that seemed to follow her everywhere she went. The whispers that had once been confined to hallways and parking lots had now reached her superiors. An internal investigation was launched, and it wasn't long before the full extent of her relationship with Terrell came to light. The investigation confirmed what many had suspected. Jova, a respected corporal, had been romantically involved with a man who had a criminal record. For the department, this wasn't just a breach of protocol. It was a betrayal of trust. The fallout was swift and severe. Jova was suspended from the force, her badge and gun stripped away. The career she had spent over a decade building was now in ruins. To her peers, this was a stark fall from grace. To Jova, it was a devastating loss, a blow that cut to the core of who she was. Without her job, Jova's life became unmoored. The structure, the respect, the sense of purpose that her career had given her was gone. And as she sat at home, surrounded by the silence of what used to be a promising future, one thought consumed her. She had given up everything for Terrell Douglas, a man who, in her darkest hour, was nowhere to be found. As the weeks passed, Jova's frustration turned into anger. She began to notice patterns. Terrell's absences weren't just random, they were calculated. He was pulling away, slowly but deliberately, as if he was trying to extricate himself from their relationship. Then came the devastating revelation. Terrell was planning to leave her. Friends told her that he had been talking about moving out of town, starting over somewhere new. For Jova, this was the ultimate betrayal. He wasn't just leaving her. He was leaving their unborn child, the life she had risked everything to build with him. On the morning of June 3, 2023, Jova confronted Terrell at his home. The conversation started tense and quickly escalated. Witnesses later reported hearing raised voices, accusations hurled back and forth. Jova demanded answers. Why had he lied? Why had he stayed if he had no intention of committing to her? But Terrell, ever the smooth talker, deflected her questions. He told her that she was being irrational, that she was overreacting. The dismissiveness only fueled her anger. The confrontation ended with Jova storming out, her mind racing. She had lost her career, her reputation, and now, it seemed, the man she had sacrificed it all for. As she drove away, the weight of her decisions pressed down on her. Terrell's betrayal wasn't just personal. It was the culmination of every fear, every doubt, every warning she had ignored. And as the hours ticked by, the tension built, setting the stage for a final irrevocable act that would change both of their lives forever. By the time the morning of June 4th arrived, Jova Jackson was a woman on the edge. Her life had spiraled out of control, and the lines between love, betrayal, and self-preservation had blurred beyond recognition. What happened next would shock the quiet community of Jonesboro and leave a trail of questions that would haunt everyone who knew them. Was this an act of desperation? Or was it something far more calculated? Stay with us as we uncover the events of that fateful morning and the choices that led to tragedy. The morning of June 4, 2023, began like any other in Jonesboro, Georgia. The sun was just beginning to rise over the quiet streets, and the town's residents were starting their day, unaware that tragedy was about to unfold. For Jova Jackson, however, this morning was anything but ordinary. Her thoughts were consumed by anger, betrayal, and the overwhelming weight of everything she had sacrificed. It was a pressure that had been building for months, and on this day, it finally reached its breaking point. At 7:45 a.m., Jova arrived at Terrell Douglas's home. Witnesses later reported that she appeared tense. Her movements hurried as she approached the front door. Neighbors heard raised voices shortly after. The argument between Jova and Terrell grew louder, with accusations and frustrations spilling out into the stillness of the neighborhood. One neighbor, who lived across the street, described the exchange as heated, with Jova repeatedly demanding answers that Terrell seemed unwilling to provide. Then, at 8:10 a.m., the confrontation took a sudden and irrevocable turn. A single gunshot echoed through the street, startling residents and sending them rushing to their windows. When the police arrived minutes later, they found Terrell's lifeless body on the floor of his living room. A single gunshot wound to his chest. Standing nearby was Jova, her face pale, her hands trembling as she held the firearm. A service weapon she was no longer authorized to carry. It was still warm. The scene was chaotic. Officers immediately took Jova into custody, her once pristine uniform now a haunting reminder of what she had been and what she had become. Neighbors gathered outside, whispering in disbelief as Jova was placed in the back of a squad car. The woman they had known as a dedicated law enforcement officer was now at the center of a murder investigation. As investigators began piecing together the events of that morning, they uncovered a web of evidence that painted a complex and conflicting picture. The first major breakthrough came from Jova's phone, which contained weeks of text messages between her and Terrell. The messages revealed escalating arguments, with Jova growing increasingly desperate for Terrell's attention and commitment. One text, sent just 2 days before the shooting, read, "You can't keep treating me like this. I gave up everything for you." Another, sent by Terrell, was chilling in its detachment. "I told you I don't want to be tied down. You need to let this go." These messages provided investigators with a glimpse into the volatile nature of their relationship. A relationship marked by passion, betrayal, and emotional turmoil. But the texts were just one piece of the puzzle. Witnesses offered conflicting accounts of Jova's behavior in the days leading up to the shooting. Some described her as distraught, a woman pushed to the brink by Terrell's indifference and infidelity. Others claimed she appeared calm, almost eerily so, as if she had already made up her mind about what she was going to do. Physical evidence from the scene added another layer of complexity. Forensic analysis of the firearm confirmed that it was discharged at close range, suggesting an intimate encounter rather than a random act of violence. Terrell's injuries indicated that he had been standing when the shot was fired, facing Jova directly. Investigators found no signs of a struggle, no overturned furniture, no defensive wounds. This detail raised a crucial question. Had Jova acted in self-defense, or was this a deliberate act of revenge? Adding to the mystery were statements from neighbors who had heard the argument. Some claimed they heard Terrell shouting threats, his voice angry and aggressive. One witness even suggested that he might have been advancing toward Jova when the shot was fired. Others, however, described Jova as the dominant voice in the exchange, accusing Terrell of betrayal and demanding answers. These conflicting accounts left investigators grappling with the true nature of the events that led to Terrell's death. The investigation also unearthed details about Jova's mental state in the weeks before the shooting. Friends and colleagues described her as a shadow of her former self, consumed by the fallout from her suspension and the unraveling of her relationship with Terrell. She had confided in one close friend, saying, "I don't know how much more I can take. It feels like my whole world is falling apart. For investigators, these statements pointed to a woman under immense psychological pressure, raising the possibility that the shooting was an impulsive act born of desperation. But the prosecution saw things differently. To them, the text messages, the firearm, and Jova's decision to confront Terrell that morning all pointed to premeditation. They argued that Jova had gone to Terrell's home with the intention of confronting him and ultimately ending his life. Her calm demeanor at the scene, they claimed, was not the result of shock, but of calculated resolve. As the evidence mounted, the case against Jova became increasingly polarizing. To some, she was a tragic figure. A woman betrayed by the man she loved, pushed to her breaking point by circumstances beyond her control. To others, she was a former law enforcement officer who had allowed her emotions to cloud her judgment, crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. As the community of Jonesboro grappled with the shock of Terrell Douglas's death, the question on everyone's mind was simple yet profound. What really happened in that house? Was Jova Jackson a victim of her own emotions, caught in a moment of desperation? Or was she a calculating perpetrator, driven by a desire for revenge? These were the questions that investigators, prosecutors, and the public would wrestle with in the weeks to come. And as Jova prepared to face the legal system, one thing was certain: the truth, whatever it was, would not come easily. In the weeks following Terrell Douglas's death, the legal proceedings against Jova Jackson began to take shape. The once respected deputy, whose career had been marked by diligence and dedication, now faced charges of second-degree murder. The courtroom became a battleground, a place where Jova's motives, emotions, and actions would be dissected in excruciating detail. The prosecution wasted no time presenting their case. To them, this was a clear-cut example of premeditation. They argued that Jova's decision to drive to Terrell's home that morning was not a spur-of-the-moment act, but a calculated move fueled by anger and betrayal. They pointed to her recent suspension from the sheriff's office, suggesting that the loss of her career had left her feeling desperate and unmoored, combined with Terrell's infidelities and his plans to leave her. The prosecution painted a picture of a woman who had reached her breaking point and decided to take matters into her own hands. Central to their argument were the text messages exchanged between Jova and Terrell in the weeks leading up to the shooting. The prosecution highlighted messages where Jova expressed frustration and heartbreak, accusing Terrell of abandoning her and their unborn child. In one particularly damning message, she wrote, "You'll regret treating me like this." To the prosecution, this wasn't just an expression of hurt. It was a warning, a glimpse into Jova's state of mind as her relationship with Terrell deteriorated. The defense, however, presented a very different narrative. They portrayed Jova as a woman pushed to the edge by circumstances beyond her control. Her attorney argued that she had gone to Terrell's house that morning not with the intention of harming him, but to confront him about his betrayal and abandonment. They described Jova as emotionally vulnerable, a woman carrying the weight of a child's future while grappling with the fallout of a relationship that had cost her everything. The defense framed the shooting as an act of self-defense, claiming that Terrell's behavior in the moments leading up to his death had left Jova feeling threatened and cornered. One of the key points in the defense's argument was the testimony of a neighbor who claimed to have overheard the confrontation. According to the witness, Terrell's voice had been raised and aggressive, while Jova sounded panicked and upset. The defense used this testimony to suggest that Terrell might have been advancing toward Jova when she fired the fatal shot. They argued that, in that moment, Jova believed she was protecting herself and her unborn child from harm. Outside the courtroom, the case sent shockwaves through Jonesboro. For many, the idea that Jova Jackson, a deputy who had dedicated her life to upholding the law, could be involved in such a tragic event was almost impossible to comprehend. Opinions about her actions were deeply divided, creating a rift in the community that lingered long after the trial began. Some residents sympathized with Jova, citing the immense sacrifices she had made throughout her career and the emotional toll of her personal struggles. They viewed her as a tragic figure, a woman who had been let down by a man she trusted and by the very institution she had served for over a decade. Supporters pointed to her years of service, her compassion for the community, and the pressure she faced as evidence that this was not a case of malice, but of desperation. Others, however, saw Jova's actions in a very different light. To them, her decision to take a firearm to Terrell's home that morning was a betrayal of everything her badge stood for. They argued that, as a trained law enforcement officer, Jova should have known better than to let her emotions dictate her actions. For these individuals, her crime was not just a personal failure, but a violation of the public trust, a stark reminder of the consequences when those sworn to protect the law take it into their own hands. After weeks of testimony, arguments, and emotional appeals, the jury finally reached a decision. On the final day of the trial, the courtroom was packed with spectators, each waiting to hear the fate of Jova Jackson. The verdict was announced: guilty of manslaughter. It was a decision that reflected the complexity of the case, acknowledging the emotional turmoil Jova had endured, but also holding her accountable for her actions. The judge sentenced Jova to 25 years in prison, a sentence that sparked mixed reactions within the community. To some, it was a fair punishment for a crime that had taken a life and shattered countless others. To others, it was a harsh penalty for a woman who had been pushed to the brink by a series of devastating circumstances. As Jova was led out of the courtroom, her face was a mixture of resignation and sorrow, a stark contrast to the confident deputy she had once been. Jova's story is a sobering reminder of how quickly life can unravel. What began as a promising career in law enforcement ended in tragedy, a spiral of choices and emotions that led to a single, irreversible act. For the residents of Rockdale County, the case left a lasting impact, forcing them to confront uncomfortable questions about loyalty, betrayal, and the fine line between love and obsession. Even now, years after the events of that June morning, the story of Jova Jackson continues to spark debate. Was she a victim of her own emotions, overwhelmed by heartbreak and despair? Or was she a perpetrator, someone who allowed anger and betrayal to push her beyond the bounds of the law? These are questions that may never have definitive answers, but they serve as a powerful reminder of the human cost of decisions made in moments of pain and vulnerability. And as Jova sits in her prison cell, the weight of her actions bearing down on her, one question undoubtedly lingers in her mind: was it worth it? The story of Jova Jackson is one that leaves us with more questions than answers. Was she a victim of love and betrayal, caught in a whirlwind of emotions she could no longer control? Or was she someone who knowingly crossed a line, letting anger and despair drive her to a choice that cost a life and ultimately her freedom? The line between desperation and intent is often thin, and in Jova's case it may forever remain blurred. Her fall from a decorated deputy to a convicted felon is a tragic tale of ambition, heartbreak, and the consequences of choices made in the heat of the moment. It forces us to consider the complexities of human relationships and how quickly emotions can spiral into actions with irreversible consequences. As we reflect on this case, we must ask ourselves, what would we have done in her position? Could this have been prevented, or was it destined to end this way from the start? If this story resonated with you or gave you a new perspective, let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Do you believe Jova was a victim of her circumstances, or do you think justice was served in her sentencing? We'd love to hear your insights. And if you found this story compelling, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications to stay updated on more thought-provoking true crime stories. These stories challenge us to confront the gray areas of human behavior, and we're here to bring them to you every week. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next episode.